नमस्ते।
नमस्कार स्वामी।
नमस्ते।
नमस्कार स्वामी।
नमस्ते।
नमस्कार स्वामी।
नमस्ते।
हेलो फणी जी। Has फणी जी come? Ajay garu, can you start then? फणी जी is not here. नमस्कार सर।
नमस्ते।
परब्रह्म समारंभां श्रीदत्तात्रेय मध्यमां श्रीदत्तस्वामी पर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्परां।
रघु।
सर्वसुपन्नस्तपादपद्मायते वामहस्तालोलवेदशास्त्रायते ज्ञानसूर्यायते तत्तरूपायते श्रीवेणुगोपालकृष्णाय वन्दनम्। श्रीवेणुगोपालकृष्णाय वन्दनम्। श्रीवेणुगोपालकृष्णाय वन्दनम्। गुरुदत्त श्रीदत्त प्रभुदत्त पाहि माम्। विधिदत्त हरिदत्त हरदत्त रक्ष माम्। नमस्कार सर।
नमस्ते।
Swamiji, shall we continue from the last time?
Yes.
When about that Advaita discourse
Yes.
we were discussing.
Yes.
We continue from there.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, sir. Just one second. So we are discussing this topic related to the refutations of some of the Advaita arguments, and this question was originally posed by Prasad Garu, and he has brought he had some debates with some scholars of Advaita, and they posed several questions, and Swamiji is now answering all the questions that those argumentators have posed. And in fact, Swamiji has taken a very unique approach in which he has said that he can refute this concept that the soul, which is awareness, is God. This can be refuted merely on the basis of the process of knowing. Awareness, the quality of awareness or the inherent nature of awareness is to know. So based on the process of knowing itself, we can completely distinguish between God and the soul. And this is what Swamiji has proved. This is a summary which tells that the knowing process, the process of knowing consists of 4 components: the subject, the instrument, the knowledge, and the object. The Sanskrit words for that are pramata, pramanam, prama, and prameya. If you look at the case of the soul, the subject, instrument, and knowledge are all made out of awareness, and the object can also be awareness if the soul is thinking about some object in some thought, when the thought is the object, it is thinking of a memory which is stored in its own mind. So in that case, that object also becomes awareness. But otherwise, that object could be some small part of creation. Now, you look at the case of God, it is completely different. The subject, the instrument, the knowledge, everything is unimaginable. That goes into the unimaginable domain. And in fact, you cannot even distinguish between these 3, because in the unimaginable domain, you cannot have any divisions or partitions. The unimaginable domain is only one. So it is the unimaginable God who is the knower. He knows things through unimaginable means, and his knowledge is also unimaginable. The object, he can view the entire creation. He can observe the entire creation. We cannot view or observe the entire creation. We don't even know the boundaries of the entire creation. But God can know the entire creation, and he can know it through and through, in and out, because he is the one who has created it. This is that basic scheme on the basis of which Swamiji is proving that it is not the soul is not God. So that clearly shows that distinction. Now, in this context, Swamiji has periodically made references to the absolute reality and the relative reality. And there also is an imaginary world or the imaginary reality, which is known as the Pratibhasika Satta. This even the Advaita scholars also very frequently they discuss about this. The absolute reality is called the Paramartha Satta. The absolute reality or Paramartha Satta contains only one, originally it contains only one entity, and that is the unimaginable God. The relative reality is the Vyavahara Satta or the transactional, the world, the creation that we talk about. That contains the souls as well as the external world. It is what is experienced by the soul. The Pratibhasika Satta is the imagination of the soul, the imaginary world created by the soul. Swamiji has clarified that dreams should not be used in the context of comparing God's creation of the world. God, the world is an imaginary world, is an imagination of God. So in that context, the soul seeing a dream, while the sleeping soul watching a dream, this example should not be used because that is not relevant. The sleeping soul is completely bound by ignorance. It has absolutely no consciousness of its own body and the world around it because it is disconnected from its senses. So that is a different case. God is never covered by ignorance, and so you cannot use that analogy. But the soul, if the soul is daydreaming, is creating his own imagination while he is awake, then that can be used as an analogy to understand how God created this world. So now moving further, now we are going to discuss, or we are looking at arguments given by the Advaita scholars. So the Advaita scholars, they define the Atman or the soul in three ways. These are, if you look at any Prakarana Grantha on Advaita, Prakarana Granthas are these introductory texts where they very systematically lay out the entire theory in a nutshell. Otherwise, to gather all those concepts, you will have to go to the Shankara Bhashya on Brahma Sutras, you will have to go to some part of the Gita Bhashyam, and so on and so forth. But in the Prakarana Granthas, everything comes together in a nutshell and it's easy to understand. So the way they define it is, what do they define? They define the Atman. The Atman, which is the soul, that is defined as that which exists beyond the three bodies. What are the three bodies? The Sthula, Sukshma, Karana, Sharirat, Vyatirikta. The Sthula body is the gross body or the physical body. The Sukshma body is the subtle body, which is the body of your thoughts. The Karana Sharira, as defined by Advaitis, is the avidya or the fundamental ignorance of the soul. Okay, that is called the Karana Sharira according to Advaita. Another definition for Atman is that which exists beyond the five sheaths. They are called Panchakoshas. Panchakoshas. Panchakoshatita. Atma is Panchakoshatita. And it is also called the witness of the three states, Avasthatraya Sakshi. And then they positively also define it as Satchidananda Swarupa Atma. That is how they define it. So now what is this? Let us pay attention to this, because he mentioned this analysis of the five sheaths. Atma is that which is beyond the five sheaths. So we should first understand what these five sheaths are, which we looked at last time. If you look at a human being, externally, first thing you see is his body. So that body is called the Annamaya Kosha, which is that body which you see is the modification of food. All the Sapta Dhatus, or the 7 components of the body, like blood and body fluids, muscle, bone and all that, they are all composed of the food. They are modifications of the food that the person has eaten. So that is called the Annamaya Kosha. But if you look further inside, then you have what is known as the Pranamaya Kosha. It is said to be, Prana means air or oxygen, and that is composed of the Pancha Pranas, Prana, Apana, Udana, Samana, Vyana. So these, if you look at the modern classification, they constitute all the physiological processes. So all the physiological processes which are basically driven by energy. So you could also think of it as the energy sheath. So this is the matter sheath, this is the energy sheath. Sheath is like a covering. That covers the Atma. You want to identify the Atma, and you have taken the human being as a specimen, and now you are going to analyze the human being, and you are going to find out where the Atma is. So initially you feel that it is Annamaya, the physical body is the Atma, but then you go inside, you see that there is the Pranamaya sheath, and you go even further in and you see his mind. So there are so many thoughts, emotions, feelings. So that seems to appear as the Atma, but actually the Atma is even further inside. There is inside the Manomaya is the Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is the modification of knowledge, which is the intellect. That is actually not the innermost self of that person. And so you go in further and you see what is known as the Anandamaya Kosha, which is a predominance of happiness. And this of course I'm talking from the Advaita angle. Swamiji has not explained the Anandamaya as a predominance of happiness. He has said that it is the goal which a soul wants to attain. Any person, any living being wants to attain that state of happiness where there is no limitation or nothing harming it. So if that state of happiness can be attained if the Vijnanamaya or the knowledge is correct, if that knowledge is given by the Sadguru, just as you see in the case of Krishna, in the case of Mahabharata, when Arjuna made Krishna as his charioteer, then he could win the war. Then he could attain happiness. Happiness of, being the king of a country. He could get his kingdom back. But if he had instead not had Krishna in the driving seat, in the driver's seat, and somebody else, then he might have gotten wrong guidance, and then he would have ended up in misery. Perhaps his brothers, his near and dear ones, they would have all gotten killed, and he would have also gotten killed. So the Vijnanamaya Kosha is what decides whether you are going to attain Ananda or not. So Ananda is really not let's say, it is not always there by default. This is the clarification that Swamiji has given. However, the Advaitis feel that Anandamaya Kosha is always there, and they call it that inner core where you are filled with ignorance, but you still enjoy. So it's the enjoyer, the Bhoktrutva has its center over here in the Anandamaya Kosha, according to them. But they say that the soul or the true Atman is actually even inside that, further inside. So that soul is the Atman. It is the Panchakoshatita, that which is beyond beyond the 5 koshas. That is said to be the Panchakosha. That is said to be the Atman. If we kind of make a certain classification, then we can say that the Annamaya Kosha is matter, the Pranamaya Kosha is energy, and the Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya, and the soul itself. They are all awareness. Okay, so matter, energy, awareness. This is one classification you can make. You can also make another classification that the Annamaya can be represented by the digestive system, because the food gets digested in the digestive system, and that is what constitutes your whole body. The respiratory and the circulatory systems are responsible for the Pranamaya Kosha, and the nervous system is the cause for all these. Manomaya is your mind, Vijnanamaya is your intellect, Anandamaya is the happiness that you obtain, and the basic awareness, which is your soul. So all these put together are represented by the nervous system. So these are the Panchakoshas basically. And the Advaita scholar says that soul which you found beyond the 5 koshas, that soul itself is God. So as long as he was saying that if you peel out this outer shell, don't actually do it, but let's imagine theoretically, if you peel out that outer shell, you have another shell inside, you have another shell inside, another shell, peel out all the 5 shells, and what you get is the soul. If he had stopped at that, there was no objection. It is quite a good analysis, and we can accept that. But what he is saying is that Atma, which is beyond the 5 sheaths, itself is God. So that Atma itself is Brahman, and Brahman he uses in the sense of God, the ultimate Brahman. So And he quotes the great Vedic statements. That is why he says that Vedic statements say Aham Brahmasmi. It is in this sense that the Veda is saying Aham Brahmasmi or Tattvamasi and so on and so forth. So the reality is not like that, because that soul or the pure awareness which is present beyond the five sheaths is actually only a converted form of energy, and it depends on both matter and energy, because that conversion process requires a nervous system. Without the nervous system, the energy will remain energy, it will not get converted into awareness. If the nervous system is there but there is no energy, then again the awareness will not be formed. So it depends on both matter and energy. So something that depends on matter and energy cannot be the ultimate God. Okay? The awareness that we have found out after doing this Panchakosha analysis, we have only found out awareness which is a part of the relative reality. We have not at all touched the absolute reality. So Swamiji has given a very nice example that you dug a whole mountain, and what you have achieved is nothing but the relative reality, which is at the surface of the earth. You could not go deeper and find the real buried treasure, which is Parabrahma. Parabrahma is the real treasure which you were trying to locate, but instead what you have found is not worth it. So then the Advaita opponent says that no, it is just between the Atma and the soul and Brahman. Brahman is God. There is just a difference of Upadhi. Upadhi I explained as something like a container. So he says that Ishvara can be considered to be the entire macrocosmic vessel, and Jiva can be considered to be a microcosmic or micro scale vessel. So you can also compare the Ishvara to an ocean and the Jiva to a drop of the ocean. Then what is Brahman? Brahman is neither Jiva nor Ishvara, but it is the water, the basic water. The basic water is what is Brahman or Atman, and that is awareness. And a large quantity or the entire quantity of that awareness in creation is called Ishvara, and the small quantity, individual quantity of that is called the Jiva. This is what the Advaita scholar is arguing. So, but this argument is not very logical, because if you look at the process of creation, it is said in the Veda that from Atma came space, from space came gas, from gas came energy to liquid, and liquid to solid, plants, food, and finally awareness was produced at the end of the chain. Now if the Advaita scholar is claiming that this awareness, which is at the end of the chain, actually was the beginning of the chain, then it is not at all a logical argument. So because you see, if let us assume that the Advaita scholar is right, and let us say that this Atman is nothing but awareness. Okay? If it is the awareness, then since it is the cause for the space, it cannot be limited by space. Space can be limited by its cause. The cause cannot be limited by the effect. So you cannot say that the Upadhi argument that he had brought in is that the soul is also God, but it is only a difference of Upadhi. So that argument doesn't stand, because you are claiming as if the space is going to limit. The Upadhi is defined in as name and form, so it is defined in space. That Upadhi cannot actually limit something that is its cause. So space cannot limit its cause. That is the argument that Swamiji is making. So Swamiji gave that wonderful example that if according to what the Advaita scholar is saying is true, then the elephant, which has much greater size, volume, must be more intelligent than the soul, than a human being, because the human being has a very small comparatively in mass, the human being is much smaller, its brain, nervous system, everything is much smaller. The elephant is much larger. So then the elephant should be more intelligent than the human being. So this clearly, that line of argument is not true. This entire concept that Atman is the awareness is not at all true, and that is why this kind of absurd result is coming in the Advaita argument. So why did then Shankaracharya, if it is an absurd claim, then why did Shankaracharya give this Advaita theory? So there we have to understand Shankaracharya's intention behind giving the Advaita theory, rather than only concentrating on the what. This is what the Advaita scholars do. They read the Bhashya and they say that they only focus on what Shankaracharya said. They don't focus on why he said that. So Shankaracharya did say that God is, the soul itself is God. This is what he said. But we have to understand why he said that. He said that to uplift atheists. It was a beneficial illusion that he created, which has that three-step kind of argument. The first argument is that you are God. Second point is you exist. And the third point is therefore God exists. So in order to prove to them that God exists, in order to make them say with their own mouth that God exists, he had to play this trick. It was a trick, it was an illusion, but it was a beneficial illusion, it was a necessary illusion. And he did it to uplift the atheists. So the atheists who followed him, rather than remaining atheists, they became theists. Although they might not have reached the climax of theism immediately in the first step itself, but at least they entered into the door of theism. Then gradually two other acharyas came and they lifted them further up. The two other acharyas are Ramanujacharya followed by Madhvacharya. So what Shankaracharya actually said, that was also not wrong. Because saying that no soul is God is like a drought, that is not correct. Saying that every soul is God is like a flood, and that is also not correct. And what is correct? The golden middle is correct. That one particular soul in whom God has merged and who has become the incarnation, that particular soul is God. That is true. So whatever Shankaracharya said was even literally true, that the soul is God, but it does not mean every soul is God. That's the point that we have to remember. Now, another thing about Shankaracharya's approach is he called one of the arguments against him is that he says the whole world is Maya, that it's non-existent. It is not non-existent. Shankaracharya never said it's totally non-existent. It is relatively real. So we have seen these three sattas, or the three levels of existence, three levels of reality. There's the absolute reality, relative reality, and the imagination. So if we just take the absolute reality and the relative reality has two parts, two components. One part is that it is basically, inherently it is unreal. And the second aspect of it is that it has been granted reality for the entertainment of God. So this absolute reality, God is the absolute reality. He granted the status of absolute reality to something that is basically unreal. The relative reality is basically one level lower. Since it is lower, we can assume that to be unreal. It belongs to a lower level. But God lifted it up to the level of absolute reality for his entertainment. So he lifted it up. He has given the same status of reality to the world, to creation. The creation includes matter, energy, as well as soul, like us. To that entire creation consisting of matter, energy, awareness, God gave the status of absolute reality. What is its original status? Its original status is unreal. It is non-existent. From God's point of view, it is non-existent. But he gave the status of existence, of absolute existence, absolute reality, because if this relative reality, which is like an imagination for him, if that remains unreal, he will not get complete entertainment. So in order to get complete entertainment, he lifted it up to the level of absolute reality. So the absolute reality, God, which is Paramartha Satta, lifted up the relative reality, which is basically unreal, and he brought it to his same level. Now, this relative reality is absolutely real for souls, because we souls belong to this reality. So, a second soul or matter or energy, they are of an equal level of reality for us. So, as far as we are concerned, all other souls as well as matter, energy, and the entire creation is absolutely real. The relative reality cannot be said to be totally unreal, because God has granted that level of reality to it. So Shankaracharya defined it as Sadasat Vilakshana. He called it Mithya. He used this specific word called Mithya, which he defined as that which is neither real nor unreal. Now, regarding this, in the 7th and 8th parts, Swamiji is of this same discourse. It's a very long, extended discourse, really wonderful. Once you get into it, you start reading and you start enjoying that, you will not want to leave it. It's such a beautiful discourse. So in that, Swamiji is going to explain further very critical points, which I'm going to skip right now. When we come to that part, we will learn more about that. But basically, Shankaracharya said that this creation is mithya, meaning it is neither real nor unreal. And he called it Sadasat Vilakshana. So now, if you compare the omnipotent God with the impotent soul, impotent means not powerful. Omnipotent means all powerful. Potency or potence means strength or power. So God is all powerful. Omni means all, potent means power, powerful. So all powerful God and not powerful soul. Okay? Impotent. Impotent is the negative of this. So God lifted the relative reality, which includes the imagination of the soul. He lifted it up to his own level. Now, the soul, which is part of this relative reality, it also wants to dream. Dream as in like a daydream. Okay. It also wants to create an imaginary world, and it also wants to lift its own imagination to its own level. Okay. Now, that is not its own level. It is the level granted by God. Okay. This high level is granted by God. The soul wants to lift up its own imagination also to that same level. Okay. It is like, once one person gets a government job, he immediately wants to pull his relative also to that same job. He also wants to bring that relative to his same level. Similarly, this relative reality, that is the soul, wants to pull its own imagination to that same level. Why does it want that? Because when we imagine an imaginary world, it doesn't seem very real to us. So we cannot get full entertainment. If we can make it very real, then our entertainment will also be maximum. So it is, now see what happens. It tries to lift it up, but it cannot. And the reason is, the soul is impotent, and basically the relative reality has two components. It has the absolute reality granted by God as a gift, and the inherent unreality. So the soul cannot transfer the gift of absolute reality given by God further. It cannot pass it down to its own imaginary world. It fails in doing that. And as a result, the imaginary world or the imagination remains at a lower level of reality as opposed to the outside world, which has attained the level of absolute reality due to the gift given by God. Now, when these arguments are posed to the Advaita scholar, he says, I agree that there are differences between God and the soul, like the Jiva and the Ishvara, but let us neglect those differences and let us only focus on the common point that both are aware, both are able to know, so both must be aware, and therefore let us only focus on that common point that both are aware, and then say that God and the soul are one and the same. So on what basis, on what logic can the differences be neglected. In order to understand that, we have to understand what are the figurative use of words, which is called lakshana. Based on that, there is a particular type of lakshana. Based on that, you can neglect the differences, and you can accept only the common, retain only the common point. So let's move to this discussion of the lakshanas. But before that, this whole rejecting the difference and accepting the common factor, where is this Advaita scholar using it? He is using it to interpret the Mahavakya, particularly the Mahavakya Tattvamasi, but it equally applies to the others also. So this is what I was mentioning. The words can be interpreted. Words in a statement can be interpreted in two ways. One is by the literal meaning. You can interpret the word by its literal meaning. The second is the indicative meaning. The indicative meaning is the lakshartha. So this is the approach that we are going to follow, or the Advaita scholar is going to follow in order to interpret. The last three of the four great Vedic statements, these great Vedic statements of Mahavakya, are four in number, and the first one is Prajnanam Brahma, excellent knowledge is God. This is different in nature because compared to the other three. The other three are essentially stating that the soul is God. Okay, whereas the first one is defining who God is. It is saying that excellent knowledge is God. It doesn't literally mean that the excellent knowledge is God. The giver or the possessor of excellent knowledge is God, and is the embodied God. So the Upanishads and the Vedas, that each of these Mahavakyas are to be found, this is also given over here. But let's focus our attention because of the context. The context is about the differences to be neglected and the common factor alone to be retained. That is our context. So let us focus our attention on these last three. And you see that the first one says, I am God. The second one says, you are God. It uses the word that to indicate God. So Tattvamasi. And the third one says that this soul is God. This person is God. I am Atma. So if you look at the nature of these three, they basically are equations. Soul is equal to God. That is what they are saying. Everywhere the word used is asi or asmi. Asmi is the first person singular. Asi means you, the second person. This word means is or to be. Okay, so hence it is an equation. When it is said aham brahma asmi, it means I am Brahman. That is what the meaning is. I, who is I? I am the soul. The soul is Brahman. This is what all these statements are saying. Now, in interpreting these statements, can we use the literal interpretation, literal meaning? Is the literal meaning permissible over here? No, it is not permissible, because the soul is very limited. God is all powerful. He is the creator. How can the soul be God? So literally you cannot take the meaning. But indicatively, you can probably accept the statement. And the Advaita scholar is saying that you take the indicative meaning and then you equate them. So how can you take the indicative meaning? There are three types of indicative meanings. Three ways in which the indicative meaning can be taken. These are these three types of lakshanas. One is called the ajahal lakshana or ajahat or ajahal lakshana. The second one is jahat or jahal lakshana, and the third one is jahat plus ajahat. Okay, so it is jahad ajahal lakshana. So the first one is defined as when you say white runs, shveto dhavati. You obviously, white is a color. White color cannot be running. It cannot just simply run. Some white animal can run. So you say the white horse runs. Whenever you read the sentence white runs, you should interpret it in an indicative manner. You should interpret it by saying the white horse runs. So in this, the whiteness is retained. The concept of whiteness is retained in the white horse. So you are not leaving. This white is the indicative word for the white horse. So in that the whiteness is retained. The concept of whiteness, the quality of whiteness is retained. So the attribute meaning is retained over here. The Jahat Lakshana or Jahal Lakshana, in that you are not retaining that original meaning of that indicative word. So there is one sentence, Gangayam Ghosha. This village lies on the Ganga. So on the Ganga means Ganga is water, Ganga is a river. So Ganga means water. So that Ganga or water is that indicative word. But you have to leave, in order to interpret the sentence correctly, you have to leave the meaning of water over here. And you have to say that the village actually lies on the banks of the Ganga. See, the bank is land. Ganga means water. The village is not located on the water. It is not standing or sitting on the water. Okay, Gangayam could be in the water or on the water. So I am saying on the water because in English we commonly say that this town or this city lies on a certain river. So I am using the word on. So the village cannot lie on top of the water. It cannot float on the water. So it must be on the land. So you have to give up that sense of water. The indicative word's original meaning has to be given up in order to interpret it. A similar figure of speech in English is called metonymy. You commonly say that it is an order from the crown. A minister is carrying some message or something like that, a written order, and he says this order is from the crown. The crown is inanimate. How can the crown give an order? So it is actually an order from the king. The sense of crown is to be left, and the person, human being, the crown is something inanimate, so that sense is to be left, and the animate person, the human being, king, has to be understood. So this is one other type of Lakshana. The third type of Lakshana, which is what the Advaita scholar is alluding to, is the Jahala Jahal Lakshana, in which part of the attribute or part of the quality's meaning is to be retained and part is to be sacrificed. So the example given over here is Soyam Devadatta, means Saha Ayam Devadatta. What it means is he, which is the lean person seen earlier, is this stout Devadatta. So you knew one man called Devadatta in your native village. That time he used to be very lean. He was very thin. And then many years later, you saw that same Devadatta in Kashi city. And by that time, the fellow probably moved to Kashi and he used to eat a lot. So he became fat. So that when you point out in Kashi city, when you see this fat Devadatta, you are telling your friend, he is, he meaning the person I had told you from my native village, he is this stout Devadatta. So here, the difference in time, because that lean Devadatta was in the past, and the lean Devadatta you have seen in your native place. So the difference in time and place and the stoutness or leanness, those things are to be rejected. But the person is the same, his face is the same. Okay? So that person is to be retained. So this is a way of interpreting a certain statement by retaining part of the meaning and part of the attributes, qualities, and rejecting part of the attributes, qualities. So this approach or this way of interpretation is favored by the Advaita scholar, and that is why he is saying that you retain the common factor, just as you said that the person Devadatta is the same. His fatness or leanness does not matter because he is the same person. So let us neglect his fatness and leanness. Let us neglect the fact that the lean fellow was seen in the native village and the fat fellow is seen in Kashi city. Let us neglect those factors. Similarly, the soul is awareness, God is also awareness. Let us take that common factor to say that soul is equal to God. Let the differences be neglected, saying that that the knower, instrument, knowledge, everything is different. God is very powerful, God is all powerful, Sarva Shaktiman, Sarvajnaha, God is all powerful, all knowing. I have very little power, I have very little knowledge, I am Alpajnaha, Alpa Shaktiman. Let those differences be neglected. Let us just cancel those differences and just based on the common factor, let us say that God is equal to soul, soul is equal to God. So he is planning to use the Jahad Ajahal Lakshana to prove this. But here Swamiji has come up with an excellent, very shrewd kind of counter to his argument, to the Advaita scholar's argument, where Swamiji has said that in this analysis of the two persons, the one stout person and one thin person, you cannot choose a case where the two persons are already known to be the same person. That person, Devadatta, who you saw in your native village and in Kashi, he was basically the same person. You chose the same person, and then you can always say, if you already know that he is the same person, then you can say, hey, neglect his fatness or leanness. Those qualities are immaterial. He is the same person. So you already knew that. You cannot choose such an example. You cannot choose the opposite also. When you know that two people are different, when you know for sure, beforehand you know that these two people are different, then also you cannot choose that case, okay? Because you cannot say that you neglect this person is fat, that person is thin. Let us neglect the fatness and thinness, and Mr. Ram is equal to Mr. Rahim. You cannot say that because the two are clearly different people. What you should actually do, the approach should be that whether the person is same or different should be unknown, and based on your analysis you should conclude. So if your analysis takes you towards monism, which is that the two persons are one and the same, then if it is naturally, if the analysis is going in that direction, then you conclude that monism is true. If your analysis is taking you in the direction of dualism, whereby you see that those two people are different, then you accept dualism. So that is the approach that should be taken. Now if we actually do that analysis, we find that naturally it takes us to total dualism. How? What is the original nature of God? So basically you want to decide whether God and soul, there is monism or dualism. If you look at God, his original nature is unimaginable. You don't know what his original nature is. You will never come to know what his original nature is. Now, his mechanism of knowing is also completely beyond your imagination. That also you cannot understand how it is. You look at the case of the soul's original nature is awareness. How does the soul know anything? The soul's mechanism of knowing is well understood. It is based on production of awareness through the nervous system, and then we get information through senses and all that. That whole process is well known. In the case of God, it is completely, that mechanism is totally unknown. His nature is also unknown. Unknown, unknowable, not even imaginable. And that, when you say it is unimaginable, you can never say that it is awareness. He comes to know. He comes to know, we cannot say how he is able to know. We cannot say that he is, because he comes to know, he is aware. Okay? So he is called the Parabrahman. Why? Because the Advaita scholars have used the word Brahman to indicate the soul. Brahman is that which is the greatest. The Advaita scholars used the word Brahman. They captured that word and they said that Brahman can be applied to the soul. Swamiji is saying, okay, no problem. You use the word Brahman for soul because there is greatness in the soul also. It happens to be the greatest part of creation. So we can accept the word Brahman for the soul. But then in that case, the word Parabrahman must be used for God. And this again, who invented the word? Shankaracharya, who is himself the giver of the Advaita theory, he himself has coined that word, Parabrahman. He starts his Dakshinamurti Stotra with this term Parabrahman. He says, Mauna Vyakhya Prakatita Dhyana Shlokas of the Dakshinamurti Stotra. He says, Mauna Vyakhya Prakatita Parabrahma Tattvam Yuvana. So that Parabrahma was coined by Shankaracharya himself, and he also said that silence is the only expression. Because neither the words can reach the Parabrahman, neither nor can the mind reach, nor can your logic or imagination, nothing can reach him. So if you have to express what the nature of God is, the only answer is silence. You cannot express. That is the point. The case of the soul is very different. The awareness, which is its original nature, is only a relative reality. The awareness can be visualized through instruments. If you go to a doctor, they have a machine called the EEG, the electroencephalogram. Encephala relates to the head. So electroencephalogram, they just it is something like your ECG. ECG is a electrocardiogram. They put the electrodes on your chest. Here, in this case, they put it on your head, and those nervous impulses, those impulses of electrical energy, they can be visualized on a TV screen. So it means that we clearly know that the awareness is nothing but electrical activity in the brain. Electrical activity meaning it is an activity of inert energy. It is a form of inert energy. This is very clearly proved scientifically. Now there are some people who are proponents of some kind of special status for the soul. Even among the scientists also there are such people who want to claim that no, the soul is not merely electrical activity of the brain. It is, although in neuroscience a lot of research has been done about the electrical activity of the brain. But then there are some scientists who want to say, no, the soul is something very special. It is not merely the electrical activity of the brain. And one of the arguments that they have, which is known as the hard problem of consciousness. Okay, the hard problem of consciousness is basically how that seemingly mechanical device called the brain, which has electrical activity going on inside. It seems to be, externally looking, it seems to be some kind of a mechanical device, inert device. How can that inert device lead to subjective experience? What is the subjective experience? Feelings. When you are in your body, you have feelings. So that is caused by your brain. So how can that subjective experience, that special quality, how can that special quality of feeling come to an inert device? Because if you say that the nervous system is like an inert material device, and inert energy, electrical energy flowing through it in the form of the nerves are like wires. The electrical energy flowing through it is basically awareness. That is what causes the awareness. If you say that, then they will ask you, how did this special quality of feeling, how did that come then? Because you may have a computer or some other electrical device, you put in electrical energy, but that item still remains inert. It is not able to feel. It is not able to feel that subjective experience that we are able to feel. So there, Swamiji is saying that just because the brain or the human being, the nervous system of the human being, has got that special quality of feeling which differentiates it from a robot or from a computer or any other electrical device, it doesn't mean that it is God. All it means is that to an inert device or to an inert system, to an inert mechanism, God has simply granted a special quality. It does not make that inert device into God. Okay, so there is no need to unnecessarily take a long jump and say that just because that awareness or the brain, the electrical activity in the brain, that it is capable of feeling or producing feelings and that subjective experience, it must be God. That is absolutely not. It does not follow logically. It does not follow at all. It cannot be justified such a long jump. All you can say is that God granted that special quality. Agreed that an electrical machine or a computer or a robot cannot get that feeling on its own, merely based on that electrical activity, as we saw, as we saw just now. But that special quality is granted by God. Let us accept that part. Let us accept this is granted by God, but it doesn't make that entity God. Now, the issue then is that they still do not agree. The Advaita scholars still don't agree, and they say that the common ability to know, why can't that establish identity? So if they start insisting, then Swamiji has finally said, if you insist that just because God can know and you also can know, therefore you must be God, if this is your argument, then I have to stay silent, because Shankaracharya has said, Mauna Vyakhya Prakatita Parabrahma Tattvam Yuvanam, you cannot explain what the Parabrahma is. You have to remain silent, because then no argument will work with them. Then everything is so crystal clear and laid out in front of them, still they don't want to accept the obvious difference between the two cases, the cases of God and the soul. And then you have to keep silent. One cannot argue beyond the point. So that ends the third part of the among those. Now there are 8 parts already. So that ends the third part. This was a kind of an extended summary, and now the fourth part begins. And that for that fourth part there is one particular scheme that we have to understand. That is an important logic used by the Advaita scholars. So they talk of 3 levels of ignorance. The Advaita scholars talk about the 3 levels of ignorance. You see these 3 concentric circles over here. The innermost circle is called the basic ignorance, which is called the avaranam, or it is called avidya. It is the ignorance of the self. The analogy is that in dim light you see a rope and you feel that it is a snake. So then you get frightened and you start screaming. So the non-recognition of the rope is the ignorance of the true nature of the rope, is avaranam or avidya. That is the avidya. That's the core. Outside of that, you see the second circle, which is vikshepa. Vikshepa is defined as dehatma buddhi. Because I do not know who I really am, self-ignorance. I am ignorant of my own self. Since I do not know exactly who I am, I mistakenly think that I am this body. I am this mind. You saw the Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya. So I think that I am the intellect, I think I am the mind, I think I am the prana, I think I am the Deha, the Annamaya. So if you take the snake rope example, since I cannot recognize that it is a rope, which is avidya, that's the inner core, since I cannot recognize that it is a rope, I mistakenly think that it is a snake. So this mistakenly thinking that it is a snake is a projection or a superimposition, which is called vikshepa. And that further leads to what is known as raga, dvesha, adi. Raga means likes and dvesha means dislikes. And then all the other qualities follow. So firstly, I could not recognize the rope. Then I made the mistake of thinking that it is a snake. Then I start screaming and running. Okay, that is the practical effect. That is the practical effect of that ignorance. So these 3 levels of ignorance are defined by Advaita. Avidya means I do not know who I am. What is my original nature? Dehatma buddhi is I feel mistakenly that I am the body. And since I feel that I am the body, all the things that are needed for the body, or I tend to either like or dislike. All things related to the body, I either like or dislike. So that certain things you like them, certain things you dislike. So these are the 3 levels of ignorance as per Advaita. Now, how can this be visualized? Let's say you have a molten mass of metal. when that ball of metal begins to cool down, from the outside it gets hard, it solidifies from the outside. In the inside it remains liquid. Okay, something like the earth. I got this picture, a nice picture of the earth. The core is very hot, and then you have the outer core, and then you have the mantle. There's a slight difference that the inner core of the earth actually is not liquid, it is solid. And that is due to another reason, because the gravitational pressure is very high over there. So that is why it becomes solid. Otherwise it would have become liquid. But anyway, let's imagine that the inner core is liquid and the outer core is, let's say, semi-solid, and the external most part is hard rock. Okay, so the same is the case with this left side image, where the avidya can be considered to be liquid, the vikshepa can be considered to be semi-solid, and then the mala outside can be considered to be solid, hard rock. Okay, so it is easy to remove the avaranam, which is avidya, that can be easily removed by knowledge. Okay. I don't know who I am, okay, no problem. Somebody can tell me who I am, then I will come to know. But even when I come to know who I actually am, that vikshepa and mala are not going to dissolve very fast, because they are more solidified, they are more crystallized. So they do not immediately vanish. So this applies in the case of that snake rope example. In the night you felt that it was a snake and you started shouting and running. Then your friend came with a torch, and then he flashed the torch on the rope, and then you came to know it is the rope. But still, your heart is still beating fast. You are still sweating. That panic that you faced, that will take some time. After 5 or 10 minutes, then you will become normal. Immediately you cannot become normal. So although the avidya, the ignorance, was instantaneously removed when the friend turned on the torch, the vikshepa and the mala, which is your panicking and running around, that cannot immediately stop. So this is the logic of the Advaitis, that they say that the avidya is you don't know who you are, the reality is that you are God. Okay, but even if I tell you today that you are God, it is like turning on the torch. Now you know it is not a snake, you know it is a rope, but your heart is still beating fast, you are still sweating. So that will take some time. It will be removed after some time and effort. This is what the Advaita theory says. According to the Advaita theory, what is the solution, or what is the medicine for each of these levels of ignorance? To remove the avaranam or the avidya, the medicine is jnana, the knowledge that I am Brahman, aham Brahman. Okay, or the Guru will tell you Tattvamasi. What is the medicine for vikshepa? They say that is upasana, Dvaita upasana, dualistic mental worship, bhakti yoga. What is the medicine for mala? They say karma yoga. What is, they have a peculiar way of defining karma yoga also. They say you should perform action with Ishvara Arpana Buddhi. What is Ishvara Arpana Buddhi? Whatever work you are doing, you imagine that you are offering that service to God. Then whatever fruit you are getting, you accept it with Prasada Buddhi. Prasada Buddhya Svikuru. You accept that fruit as if it has been given like a prasadam from God. So you just accept it. Now, the pity is that they apply this logic to even your even mundane worldly activities, where suppose I am going to my office and I am working, actually I am working for my selfish benefit, I am working there to get a salary. But they say that no, you just mentally you offer that work to God, and when you get a salary, you accept that as a prasadam from God, then you are doing karma yoga. Actually, that is not karma yoga. As Swamiji has clearly he has told, you should actually work for God, and if you are actually serving God, not serving yourself, and even that salary that you are doing karma phala tyaga towards God, then that is karma yoga. Otherwise, it is this is just imagination. This is an imaginary karma yoga. So anyway, according to the Advaita theory, karma yoga means this: Ishvararpana buddhi and prasada buddhi. So that they say that will help you overcome your mala, which is your raga dvesha, right, likes and dislikes. The bhakti yoga, dualistic mental worship to various deities, your ishta devata, you can do that upasana. That will help you overcome vikshepa, because you are on seeing the snake, you are so frightened, no? So you are crying, screaming. So you should be pacified. How will you be pacified? You should be told that, oh, there is one God. He is very powerful. He is very kind. You pray, worship him. Then he will help you. He will rescue you. So that it is only to pacify your mind. That is what the Advaita people say. The reality is that you are that God. They claim that you are that God. This is the actual knowledge that you are God. So you don't need any other God. But this whole idea is flawed, and Swamiji has beautifully brought out those points, which I'm going to read through the discourse, and I think that will help you clearly follow all those points. Now that the background is there, there's 3 types of avaranas. It will be easy for you to follow. So this is part number 4, individual and cosmic illusion, and these terms, that the avarana, vikshepa and all that, they are going to come in this answer given by Swamiji. If we had not known those, then it would have been difficult for us to follow those points. So that's why those diagrams and everything was given. Okay, so Swamiji said, a person or a soul having little knowledge might be under an illusion about himself. But even such a person is able to remember and recognize his true nature when he is reminded about it. Then how can the omniscient and omnipotent God ever be affected by even a trace of ignorance or illusion? So, what Swamiji is saying is that this entire scheme of that 3 levels of ignorance, that is okay as long as you are talking about an individual. When you are talking about God, that is completely not justified. Even in the case of an ordinary person, if he is told his true nature, then he can also easily accept that. It does not take such a long time for him to come out of even the vikshepa and mala. It does not take such a long time to come out of that. And in the case of God, obviously there is no question of God having any ignorance. So God can, then how can the omniscient and omnipotent God ever be affected by even a trace of ignorance or illusion? Even the theoretical ignorance, which is the ajnana avaranam, okay? Even the theoretical ignorance of the true knowledge is impossible in the case of the omniscient God. God cannot forget his true nature, which is the absolute reality. God's true nature is unimaginable to us, but it is fully known to God. In the case of the petty imaginable soul, the soul can indeed have theoretical ignorance, which is called avaranam or avidya. It can forget its own nature. It can also suffer from the practical effect of the ignorance, called vikshepa. Vikshepa can be considered to be the practical effect of the ignorance. Then by its self-effort, this petty imaginable soul, made of relative awareness, can come out of the theoretical ignorance, which affects its intelligence. Of course, it cannot easily cross the practical effect of that ignorance. Let us take the example of a simple illusion in which a rope appears to be a snake to a person in dim light. The cause for the illusion or error is the individual's ignorance of the true nature of the rope. This is avaranam or avidya. As a result of that theoretical error, the person begins to shake with fear. This shaking with fear is the practical effect of the theoretical error and is called vikshepa. By turning on the torchlight, the person gets the true knowledge of the existence of the rope and the theoretical error or avidya vanishes. But the fear, which is vikshepa, continues for at least some time, even after the realization. This is an example of an individual ignorance, which is which only affected one particular person. But just bringing the right slide in front of you. Yeah. Apart from this individual illusion, there is another type of illusion which is caused by God. It is called Maya. Due to Maya, God appears to be energy and energy appears to be matter to the soul. It is an illusion that affects all souls. No souls can ever come out of the practical effect of this Maya at any time, even after theoretical realization. For example, the soul may theoretically come to know that God himself appears to be energy and that energy itself appears to be matter by a process of superimposition. But the soul can never practically realize matter to be energy and energy to be God at any time. The individual himself is responsible for creating the individual illusion known as avidya, whereas it is God who is responsible for creating the cosmic illusion known as Maya. Now, over here, the Advaita scholar, again, he brings up an argument and he says, in both the examples of avidya and Maya, the common basic principle is the lack of true knowledge of the object. Hence, both are basically one and the same. He is trying to make avidya and Maya to be the same. So Swamiji says, what you say is true as far as an individual is concerned. Even for the individual soul, there is a difference between avidya and Maya. The soul can overcome the individual theoretical error or avidya immediately. And it can overcome its practical effect or vikshepa after some time. But the soul can never overcome the practical effect of the cosmic illusion Maya, even after theoretical realization. The case of God is completely different. He neither has any theoretical ignorance nor the practical effect of that ignorance. It is true that to avoid the boredom of loneliness, God created this world, which is basically unreal for him. But in order to obtain full entertainment from the world, God gave the status of absolute reality to the world. So the world, which is basically unreal to God, now appears to be absolutely real to God. It appears to be as real to God as himself. Hence the world gives full and real entertainment. When a soul creates an imaginary world for its own entertainment, the imaginary world is only relatively real with respect to God, with respect to the soul. It appears quite unclear and the soul is incapable of making that imaginary world as real as itself or as real as the external world. The soul is incapable of granting the status of absolute reality to its own imaginary world. This is because the soul itself is part of the world and the world has been granted the status of absolute reality by God. Inherently, the soul and the whole world is only a relative reality that is unreal to God. The status of absolute reality granted to the world is a God-given gift. The soul has no right or capacity to further donate that God-given gift to its own imaginary world. The gift of absolute reality only exists with the soul and the rest of the world. But the soul is not omnipotent and so cannot donate that gift further to its own imaginary world. The soul and the rest of the world is granted the status of absolute reality so that it can appear absolutely real to God and give him real entertainment. The soul always remains in the status of the object and God remains the subject. The soul can never become equal to God, who is the subject, and transfer its own absolute reality to its created imaginary world. It can only transfer its inherent characteristic of relative reality to its own creation. Due to this reason, the creation of the soul, which is the imaginary world, the creation of the soul means the created world of the soul, which is the imaginary world, can never get an equal status with the creation of God that includes all the souls. This is because the relatively real soul is not the absolutely real God. Now the opponent raises an objection over here. He says, you are calling the creation of God as absolutely real on one hand, and on the other hand, you are also calling the same creation as relatively real. Is it not a self-contradiction? So Swamiji clarifies. He says, I am saying that the creation of God only appears to be absolutely real to God to give real entertainment to Him. This does not mean that it is actually absolutely real to God. The absolute reality of this creation is only an appearance. The absolute reality granted by God to the world is only so that it should appear to be absolutely real and not to actually become absolutely real. Such an apparent absolute reality of this creation is called a relative reality. The relative reality of creation is the wish of God. Whatever the omnipotent God wishes happens. If you take the case of the soul, the whole situation is different from God. The soul is a part of this relatively real world. This means that the soul appears to be absolute in appearance to God, even though it is not actually absolutely real. The rest of creation, including other souls, appear to be absolutely real to the soul. The soul also appears absolutely real to itself. This is because with respect to the soul itself, other souls, and the rest of creation are actually absolutely real. This is based on the principle that a relatively real item is absolutely real to another relatively real item. Hence, the rest of creation not only appears to be absolutely real to a soul, but it is also actually absolutely real for us. For one soul, the other souls and the rest of creation is actually absolutely real. So there is a clear difference between God and the soul. God is really absolutely real, and the relatively real creation only appears to be absolutely real to Him. The soul is relatively real with respect to God. The rest of creation, which is also relatively real with respect to God, appears to be absolutely real to the soul because it is absolutely real with respect to the soul. The soul and the rest of creation are at the same level of reality, since the soul is only a part of creation. Now, so Swamiji is continuing further. If the soul were already God, the soul would not have even a trace of ignorance. It would never mistake itself to be the body. Dehatma Buddhi. The Vikshepa is defined as, by the Advaitas, it is defined as Dehatma Buddhi. So the soul, if the soul were actually God, the soul would never even have a trace of ignorance and would never mistake itself to be the body. God can impose such ignorance upon himself for the sake of entertainment, just like an actor imposes the ignorance of his own identity upon himself while playing a certain role. To get rid of such self-imposed ignorance of one's own identity, a wise man does not even need the help of a preacher. Is it not horrible to treat God to be an unwise person? Even a person of medium wisdom realizes his own nature on receiving the preaching of the preacher. He becomes himself immediately. Suppose a person has forgotten who he is, and if the preacher tells, oh, you are Mr. Sharma, okay. Suppose somebody tells, then we immediately we say, oh, okay, now I realize my true identity. We don't take some long time for that. So there is no place for the practical influence of the long-standing ignorance called Vikshepa. So that long-standing ignorance that we have had about our true nature, its practical effect is Vikshepa. That Dehatma Buddhi, that practical effect is Vikshepa. There is no place for the practical effect of the very long-standing ignorance called the Vikshepa Mala, the third level, which is the Mala. So there is no place for that practical influence at all. If the soul were God, as you claim, the soul's incapability to practically become God by overcoming both Vikshepa and its Mala prove God to be very weak and ineffective. Hence, in the case of God, self-imposed ignorance in the first stage of avaranam and the subsequent two stages of practical influence of that ignorance, which is vikshepa and mala, are totally impossible. They are totally unacceptable in the case of God. Of course, if you frankly admit that the relatively real soul is different from God, then your analysis is very much appreciable. So, if the person says that this is only an analysis for the soul and it is not an analysis for about God, then it is appreciable. Then there is no problem. The concepts of the soul having ignorance, the concept of the soul having ignorance called avaranam and the soul suffering from the practical effects of that ignorance called vikshepa and its mala are welcome. As long as you say that this is only an analysis of the soul and not about God, then there is no problem. We can assume that Shankara has introduced the removal of these three stages of ignorance as the three stages of the spiritual effort to become God. That too is highly appreciable. The reason is that the soul puts forth sincere efforts only when it is tempted by the highest fruit. So here Shankaracharya said that he basically gave the scheme of 3 steps of removing the ignorance, in which he introduced the Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga. These can be considered to be 3 stages on the path to becoming God. Now, why did he say that this will give you? He could have said that these are the 3 steps by which you will attain mental peace. He could have said that also. But if he says that, then nobody will be attracted to the theory. Nobody will put in sincere effort. Because everybody has this tendency to become God, or tendency to want to become God. There's a desire to become God. So he exploited that. And he exploited that for a beneficial purpose. And in the process, he uplifted so many souls. So that exploitation was a good exploitation. We can assume that Shankara has introduced the removal of the 3 stages of ignorance as the 3 stages of the spiritual effort to become God. That too is highly appreciable. The reason is that the soul puts forth sincere efforts only when it is tempted by the highest fruit. Of course, you can even tempt the soul and encourage it to pursue the spiritual path by showing a lower goal. For instance, you could say that as a result of following the path, the soul will attain its own nature of pure awareness, and that it will cross all misery in life. But if the goal of the spiritual effort is said to be the attainment of the nature of God, the followers will be highly motivated. Due to the climax of attraction that they have for becoming God, they will put forth the climax of effort. This was the intention of Shankara, and it was the intention of Shankara, and Ramanuja never found any fault with Shankara's intention. Ramanuja was an incarnation of God Vishnu, and Shankara was an incarnation of God Shiva. God Vishnu always knows the intention of God Shiva, since both are essentially one and the same. Both are energetic incarnations of God. Both of them became incarnations because the first energetic incarnation, Datta, entered into both of them. So through Datta, the same Parabrahman, the unimaginable God, has entered into both Shiva, Vishnu as well as Brahma. So these Trinity are one and the same because they contain the same first energetic incarnation, Datta, who in turn contains the Parabrahman. So at the level of the Parabrahman, or at the level of the first incarnation, Datta, all the 3 deities, which is Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, they are one and the same. So Ramanuja was an incarnation of God Vishnu, and Shankara was an incarnation of God Shiva, and God Vishnu always knows the intention of God Shiva, since both are essentially one and the same. Hence, Ramanuja always condemned only the followers of Shankara and never Shankara himself. Ramanuja always said that whatever the followers of Shankara say is not correct. He never said that whatever Shankara said is not correct. So, yaduchyate Shankaraihi. The Shankaras are the followers of Shankara. So whatever is said by the followers of Shankara, that is not agreeable. That is not correct. He never said Shankara is wrong. Because he knew that Shankara was not wrong. Shankaracharya was merely trying to uplift the people who were atheists. So that completes part 4, and it is 9:20. I can move ahead a little bit. What should we do, Swamiji? We have 10 minutes, 9:20.
No, okay. You do whatever is proper.
If there are, shall we ask people for questions?
Yes,
shall I move ahead?
yes. Ask for questions.
Yes, sir. So, if anybody has any questions, can you please either ask the questions verbally, and it would be nice also if you could later on you could paste it in the chat.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
Some few questions came out. Shall I read?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Pada Namaskaram, Swami.
Yes.
The following questions came out. The first question is from Shri Balaji Garu. Namaste, Swami. Kindly clarify on the following. Some devotees respected as gurus seem to get visions from God and have some siddhis, even though their behavior can be very egoistic without proper analysis, sometimes hurting their own followers with threats of anger of God. Hence the followers are filled with fear and follow blindly whatever these gurus say. These gurus also scold recent incarnations of God and other gurus as frauds or ignorant of the correct spiritual path. How are such gurus able to get visions of God in spite of incorrect behavior? Does this mean that they have the grace of God? Sincerely, Balaji. This is the question from Sri Balaji Garaswamy.
Yes.
The next question is from Sri Tinku Garu. His question is as follows: Is it wrong to even kill animals for the sake of protection of one's food and house? For example, ants and some other insects eat house doors and make holes in house. Rats also eat food in house or grocery stores. In such cases, is it wrong to kill such ants or such things which spoil our food or destroy our house? That is his question for me. And myself, Bharat Krishna, I got one question for me. It is related to the explanation Nikhil sir has given today. Your explanation which he has presented today related to Avarna. It is said that Avarna is impossible in the case of unimaginable God. And also I remember once asking you whether God experienced fear. And you said these Navarasas are created for the sake of entertainment of God. Hence, God experiences fear too. In such case, if God knows this, that this Avarna is not possible, that means that self-ignorance is not possible in the God, how is it possible for him to experience fear? I am little confused here, Swami. Kindly please explain about this.
Okay.
That's all, Swami. These are the 3 questions came, and if anyone else has any questions, they may ask Swami.
Let me answer the question of Bharata Krishna. Hello.
Yes, Swami.
Let me answer just a short point only there. See, God experiences fear. God is not overcome by fear like a soul. He is tasting the fear. He is not bound by the fear. There is a difference between soul and God. So when soul gets fear, he is trapped by the fear. He is not enjoying it through experience. Experience does not mean trapping. Experience means suppose you are enjoying something, you are trapped by it. Without that you can't remain. But God experiences and he is not trapped by that. He can remain even without that. Suppose you are experiencing, you are drinking wine. God is also Shankara drank wine. So here Shankara is experiencing the wine. He can remain even without wine. He drank wine to teach the disciples. But if you take the case of a drunkard, he cannot overcome the drinking of wine. Both are experiences. But this is the experience under the control in the case of God, whereas in the case of Jiva, he is under the control of that experience. That is why when difference is said between God and soul, Maya Vashikrutaha Vashikruta Maya. That is, God controls the Maya, whereas Jiva is under the control of Maya. Both have experience, but experience is under the control of God, whereas in the case of Jiva, the Jiva is under the control of experience. That difference is there. Anyway, I will write clearly. Okay.
Swami, what? Yes, Swami. Swami, a small extension of my question. In such case, is it like, can we say that the intensity of fear experienced by God and soul is different? That soul, because he's trapped by the fear, he experiences intense fear. Whereas God will not be trapped by the fear, he only experiences it, so he might not experience the intense fear.
See, God.
That can we say, or is that also wrong?
No, God also experiences the intense fear as the soul experiences. In that there is no difference. The only difference is God is not under the control of the fear, whereas the soul is under the control of the fear. When Krishna ran, seeing Kalayavana, that fellow who was after Krishna, Krishna experienced intense fear. He enjoyed the fear completely, as an ignorant person enjoys. But he is not under the control of the fear. He led him and made him to die, made him to be killed by Muchukunda. So here question of control only. As far as experience is concerned, there is no difference. Even intense fear is experienced. Even intense fear is experienced by God. Otherwise, he will not get full entertainment. You see, when you see a cinema with frightening, some cinemas are with frightening cinemas, the ghosts and the devils, etc. So horror movies. That experience is done by God. Just like you see the horror movie, he also sees the horror movie. As you are frightened, he is also frightened. Experience is one and the same, but you are under the control of that horror, and he controls that horror. Horror is under the control of God. Just next minute, if he wants, he can come out of the fear. But you can't come out of the fear. Even in the dream, again you will get the same thing in the dream. That fear you cannot get rid of it whenever you like. But he can get rid of it in the next very minute, in next very fraction of second, complete get rid of the fear. So that is the difference. Okay?
Understood, sir.
Okay.
Yes, Swami. I have witnessed it also, Swami, this one.
Yes.
Thanks.
And one more point I want to tell on this Jnana Saraswati. You see, what Dr. Nikhil is trying to explain, he is taking a lot of pains to explain each point very clearly, very clearly, very deeply also. Still there are some more points to be explained deeply, that will come in part to part. You see, one thing I want to tell all the people participating in this satsanga, especially Jnana Saraswati, is not a TV channel. In a TV channel you are entertained. You are coming to the TV channel for entertainment. Here you are coming to satsanga to reach God, to get the grace of God. TV channel entertainment is different, totally different. Here, lot of strain, pain in understanding. This Jnana Saraswati is very tough. So, if you can't face this toughness, this difficulty, if you want enjoyment like in a TV channel, here the aim is not that. The aim is not to give entertainment to you. The aim of this satsanga is to give the true knowledge of God, so that you can try, you will certainly succeed in getting the grace of God. You can certainly reach the God, you can certainly obtain the full grace of God. Here the motive is different, here the goal is different. Whereas in the case of TV channel, the motive, the goal is totally different. It only aims to give entertainment, some relaxation, some type of enjoyment. That is not the aim of the satsanga. Satsangatve nissangatvam, nissangatve nirmohatvam, nirmohatve nischalatatvam, nischalatatve jivanmukti. The ultimate goal of this satsanga is to make you jivan mukti. That is, you become God while you are alive. See how much the goal is highest goal, very, very critical, very impossible goal. That is not the goal of the TV channel, which gives entertainment to the people. So, you have to follow the satsanga very carefully, and if you have doubts, you put the questions, you clarify, and if you can't tolerate this much difficulty, how can you tolerate so many great difficulties, more difficulties in the path of the journey towards God? There are so many difficulties in the path of in the spiritual path. How can you tolerate those difficulties if you can't tolerate this much difficulty? So, don't treat this as the TV channel which is meant for entertainment. It is not for entertainment. This is for some effort to the highest goal in the life, to grant you the Jivan Mukti, Satsangatve to Jivan Mukti. In between there are so many steps, Nissangatvam, Nirmohatvam, Nischalatattvam, then Jivan Mukti. So many stages you have to pass through. So, therefore, please realize this point and follow Dr. Nikhil's explanation. He is really doing very good work, he is taking a lot of pains in going to the depth of the point. So, you try to follow. If you are not following, you ask questions. You ask him to explain once again, I am not following this, sir. You again, please repeat this, please explain again. So, you prepared, you be prepared, you come to the satsanga to attain Jivan Mukti, not come to satsanga to get some entertainment like TV channel. So, this point I want to impress on the minds of all of you. Okay? Then proceed next. Next is Mahima Yamuna. Questions are over? Hello?
Any more questions? Okay, Ajay Garu?
Done.
Nobody is asking any question? Nobody? Hello?
Swami, I think it's over, Swami. I have got 3 questions. I have presented them before you.
No, what I doubt is whether nobody is asking questions or everybody has slept. Okay. Now, Mahima Yamuna, Ajay Garu.
Namaskar, sir.
Namaste.
Namaskar.
Namaste. Okay, please proceed, Ajay garu.
Hello.
Ajay garu. Please. Namaste. Please proceed.
We are in Shivalahari of the Mahima Yamuna, the next Mahima for today's satsang. Saving the son of devotee from train accident. Swami was doing satsang in the house of Sri G. Shivaramamurthy, Tirupati. Exactly at 10 a.m., Swami stopped talking, closing eyes and saying, "I have some urgent work and will return in half an hour." Swami kept silent in the chair, becoming almost unconscious. At 10:30 a.m., Swami opened eyes, telling that the work was over. None of the devotees there understood anything, since Swami did not give any further information. In the evening, the son of Sri Sivaramamurthy came to home and told, "I am coming to Tirupati in train." Exactly at 10 a.m., our train stopped, since some person was showing red cloth on the track before the train standing far. The train stopped and the person told that the railway track lines were cut by some terrorists. The track was repaired and the son reached home in the evening. All the devotees understood everything and the parents conveyed their gratefulness to Swami. Swami's comment. Sri Sivaramamurthy is a spiritual aspirant who always believed in the practical philosophy, which is the practical sacrifice and service to God. The son who was saved from the accident was not so much deserving as the father deserved. God saved his son, seeing his face only. God could not tolerate the pain of such a devotee. Next one. Riding bike possessing me. This is the experience of Mahima Pani. One day, I phoned Swami that he should bless me next day in the examination to be attended by me. Swami told me, "I never expected that you also asked me for a boon. I will not grant any boon to you, since you have to serve me without aspiring for any favor from me. The fruits of deeds will attack you tomorrow as usual, as per your cycle." Next day, I went to the examination hall, and as soon as I sat, I was suddenly attacked with terrible fever. I was even unable to walk out with a lot of shivering, high burning sensation, and my eyes were rolling. I dropped from the examination and somehow walked out to reach my home on my bike. It was impossible for me even to sit on the bike. I prayed Swami and I saw Swami entering me. I was totally possessed by Swami. I was able to ride my bike properly on the road, and I stopped the bike just before the gate of my house. I found Swami leaving me. Immediately, the bike fell to one side and I fell to the other side. I was taken into my home by my people. Same time, Swami told in satsang about my incident, concluding, "A fellow who falls from bike in standing position drove the bike properly on the road." Swami's comment. When Pani was possessed by Swami, it indicates the concept of incarnation by temporary possession, Avesha Avatara, as in the case of Parshurama. Pani recognized that Swami drove the bike, whereas Parshurama thought that he himself drove the bike, thought that he killed all the kings, whereas God Vishnu killed all through him. The entire essence of the spiritual knowledge is that you should always be careful about your ego and self. Repeating next one. repeating promise of Sai Baba. Srimati Purna Rajamandri is a totally dedicated devotee of Swami and used to visit satsang of Swami for a long time on every day whenever he comes to Rajamandri. This was not liked by her family members since she was neglecting the house before Swami. Once Swami went to Rajamandri to the house of some other devotee called Murthy. Purna started from her house to go there and see Swami. On the way, she went to a devotee who is possessed by Sai Baba on Thursday. Since that was Thursday, the devotee was possessed by Sai Baba. Sai Baba and the devotee told Purna, "You need not leave your house and go to Datta Swami every time. Datta Swami exists in your house. Promise me that you will not leave your house for the sake of Datta Swami." She promised him and went to satsang of Swami, thinking that it is her last visit to Swami. On seeing her, Swami told, "There are no two gods. There is only one God. Datta Swami and Sai Baba are one and the same. The promise given to Sai Baba is also the same given to me. From tomorrow onwards, you need not visit me. Stay in your house. I will be with you, always protecting you." Swami's comment. This is a test conducted by Datta in the case of Purna. Opposition from the family members was also by the will of Datta only. She passed that test. The next test by Datta is Datta himself to stand as the hurdle. If her devotion is really uncontrollable, even to Datta, she will reach the plane of Nivritti. Datta will wait and see, and the soul may pass this higher test in this life or some other life in future. Earlier the better, since human birth is a rare opportunity. Let us wait and see. Next one. Saving job of elder brother of Ajay. Sri Chalpatrao, elder brother of Ajay, is working in the office of a cement factory at Vijayawada. One day, he told Ajay that his boss asked him to resign and go. Ajay was worried and conveyed this to Swami, praying Swami to protect his elder brother's job. Swami told that he will tell this to his elder brother, Lord Hanuman, to save the job of the elder brother of Ajay. Swami closed his eyes for some time and on opening eyes told Ajay, "My elder brother, God Hanuman, says that the fault lies with your elder brother only and not with his boss." Ajay insisted his elder brother to tell what exactly happened since Swami is telling in this way. Then he told, "Swami is correct. I told my boss that if he does not give promotion to me, I will resign and go." Then the boss became furious and told me that I should resign immediately and go. Now I am fearing to go to office, doubting the reaction of my boss. This was informed to Swami. Swami told, "Let him not fear. The boss will receive him cordially." Next day, when he went to office, boss received him very cordially, as if nothing has happened. Swami's comment. He must always remember that God is omniscient and you cannot fool him by partial presentation of facts. You can mislead the human being, but never God. Seeing the face of Ajay, the highest devotee only, Swami adjusted the whole case and solved the issue. Next one. Showing proof for eating. One day, Swami was fasting from morning to evening, immersed in singing devotional songs. In the noon, Srimati Sri Lakshmi insisted Swami to take some rice with sambar, a food item prepared with pulses and tamarind in liquid form. Swami told that she ate the same offered by a devotee in Chennai, where sambar is a famous preparation. Swami asked her to smell his song. When she smelled, she got intensive odor of sambar from the hand of Swami. In the evening, Ajay insisted Swami to take some rice with sambar and then with curd. Again, Swami replied the same, and order of sambar followed by order of curd were smelt by Ajay from Swami's hand. Swami's comment: fasting means to forget meal when you are immersed in God. It is normal to observe that we are not interested in our regular meals also when we watch very interesting cinema in television. If the goal is God in the place of TV, such fasting is called as upavasa. Upa, situated very near to God. Vasa, immersion in the devotion of God. There is no use of fasting if this point is absent. Next one. Time is up. 9:45 Namaskaram.
ఓకే ఓకే జ్ఞానం వేహ విభూతిర్వా యత్కించిత్ దర్శితం మయా సర్వం దత్త గురోరేవ చాపల్యంతు మమ ధ్రువం. నెక్స్ట్ భక్తి గంగా. నమస్తే.
నమస్కారం స్వామీజీ.
నమస్తే.
దత్తమా